Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This presentation is an annual report on three projects I'm involved in: the Trusted Digital Web, the Hyperonomy Business Blockchain, and Neonation. All three are related, and I'll take you through those relationships and the current status of those as we proceed. My name is Michael Herman. I'm an independent blockchain architect. I live on a ranch in southern Alberta, and I spend about 10 hours a day working on blockchain related projects, and more recently Hyperledger Indy specific projects. The purpose and goals for today's presentation is to provide an annual update on the Trusted Digital Web, the Hyperonomy Business Blockchain, and the Neonation projects. And more specifically, the goals are to provide an overview of these three projects and how they relate and support each other. I guess two of the kind of key concepts we're going to drill into a little bit are the four dimensions of the digital web. Kind of what are the drivers, what are the components of that project, and then more specifically a component called the Trusted Digital Web. Why these three projects? Why are they interesting? I found there's a need to create a frictionless, trusted, standards-based general purpose platform for end-to-end business processing on a global scale. And for it to be trusted, it needs to be blockchain based, to be general purpose platform for end-to-end business processing. It needs to be something similar to like Salesforce on the blockchain, to a lesser extent something like SharePoint on the blockchain, given that SharePoint is a general purpose collaboration and business platform. And how can we do this effectively and deliver value on the blockchain? So the three projects stack kind of like a layer cake. The middle layer is the Trusted Digital Web, which we'll talk quite a bit about as we move forward. It runs on top of the Hyperonomy Business Blockchain, and we'll talk about the conceptual architecture of HBB, of the Hyperonomy Business Blockchain. And then on top of that, and this may seem a little kind of flighty or frivolous, something called Neonation, Neo being an acronym for Never Ending Innovation. But as I've worked through different parts of the business blockchain and the Trusted Digital Web, you encounter scenarios, for example, and questions like, what is voting? That's a common scenario that needs to be addressed, an application, a use case, if you will. If you have voting, who gets to vote? What do you call people who are allowed to vote? Are they like citizens? If they're citizens, what are the pathways to citizenship? And you start beginning to realize that you're creating something akin to a nation state, even though you may think of it as just yet another blockchain project. So that's where the Neonation fits in. So let's talk about the Trusted Digital Web. The Trusted Digital Web has three main components or dimensions to it. One is decentralized currency. If we're doing end-to-end business processing on the blockchain, there's the need for currency, the ability to do payments. We need the concept of digital identity, not only for the individuals and the organizations, but also for things like business documents, purchases, purchase orders, invoices, waybills, delivery confirmations, the many dozens of different kinds of standard business documents that are exchanged billions of times a day in terms of the commerce that's being transacted around the world. Thirdly, we need business applications, and more specifically, the ability to enact business processes that involve those items on the right that have a digital identity, the people, the organizations, the business documents, being able to enact those business processes. And in any or most business scenarios, there is some sort of commerce aspect to it, and the ability to undertake procurement and payment. And this needs to come together as a fully integrated experience. Fully integrated user experience, I've contracted that to be just a fully integrated experience because it's not just about the user experience, but it's about the deployment of the platform and the full integration across these three perspectives at the bottom. So let's look at the 4 dimensions of the trusted digital web. In the bottom left-hand corner, we have decentralized currency. On the right, we have decentralized digital identity. Across the top, we have business applications, more specifically the enactment of business processes. And in the middle, fully integrated experiences I've described before. Let's look at how these work together in a pairwise fashion to realize some important capabilities. So across the bottom, if you have people and organizations and you have decentralized currency or cryptocurrency, that enables transfers, simple transfers of value, and the ability to trade, the ability to exchange one currency for another. A very basic capability. That's different from purchasing. We're talking about, on this axis, this is simple transfers and trading of value. When we talk about purchasing, we're talking about linking decentralized currency with business applications and business processes. So if we think of procurement as a purchasing capability or a purchasing activity, that's different from a transfer of value that we saw across the bottom. Purchasing is about the exchange of goods and services for some form of value. So it's a superset, if you will, of that basic capability related to the transfer of value that we talked about before. If we have people, organizations, things, business documents identified by unique, globally unique, trusted, decentralized digital identities, and we marry those with business applications, then we get a very robust form of what I call business choreography. The ability for a group of partners, and partners may be too strong in this context, a group of organizations or entities or people who don't necessarily know each other, certainly don't trust each other, being able to engage in fairly complex business relationships, simple as well as complex business relationships. And for that to happen in a very smooth, end-to-end kind of fashion, and that's what I term business choreography from a capability perspective. And so lastly, if we think about how do we bring all of these capabilities together, it's not just an add-on to existing web applications or mobile applications. We're talking about a fully integrated experience where digital identity permeates the platform, where decentralized currency permeates the platform, where the platform has a very deep sense of standards-based, business process definition and business process execution. And of course, that does come forward in terms of a user experience as well. What we see here is a small screenshot, a schematic almost, of the NOS project that runs on the Neo blockchain. It's essentially a browser. It's a fully integrated experience that brings together all three of the axes here we see at the apexes of the triangle: business applications, decentralized currency, and decentralized identity. Let's look at the trusted digital web from another perspective, and how did we get here? How did this trusted digital web project, the thinking about it, materialize? Well, if we look back on a number of other domains, application domains, technology platform domains that people are familiar with, we could start by looking at accounting. And at the top row there is kind of like applications or the user experience. And so, there's all kinds of accounting applications and web browser-based applications, Microsoft Dynamics, Salesforce, QuickBooks, etc. Staying in that accounting domain on the left, we have things, and we have identifiers for those things. We have account codes, and within account codes, item IDs and chart of accounts, etc. The middle layer there, the middle row, is sort of the transactional layer. What are the transactional elements we're talking about? So there's transactions against the journal in an accounting system, and then from that journal we project out different ledgers or subsidiary ledgers, which we see in that the fourth row. There's an overarching concept of those transactions and those subledgers running against the general ledger or the master account ledger. And you can imagine that second last row is akin to the data that we would save on a blockchain these days. People call it a ledger, a distributed ledger technology. A better word, my favorite word, is it's a journal. And if you're familiar with accounting systems, the journal is just the chronological, sort of the physical chronological record of what's happened, the list of transactions in a system. And it's from that subsidiary ledgers are projected, and it's just a historical accident that blockchains are called DLTs. And then lastly, there's what is the actual underlying software platform, and as I highlighted, there's many different ones out there, from Dynamics to QuickBooks to Salesforce, etc. If we go to the next column, the SharePoint domain just happens to be a platform I'm extremely familiar with. There's a lot of parallels. Of course, it's a web browser-based application. We have URLs and HTTP REST protocols for fetching documents and items and invoking workflows and interacting with workflows. The main sort of transactional elements there are list items and documents, and the ability to enact workflows around those from a kind of a structuring perspective. We have the root site collection, the root website for your SharePoint-based solution, and then underneath that we have second-level websites or sub-websites. And at the bottom, of course, we have a SharePoint web farms that IT or your cloud provider implements or supports for you to provide all those capabilities above. The third column suggests we look at the World Wide Web for some insight here. So again, it's a browser-based solution for the most part. We have the concept of URLs and HTTP protocols, URLs for identifying resources on the World Wide Web, and HTTP protocols for interacting with those resources, even if it's just to fetch them, to fetch a web page, but also can be used to return data. So the main kind of transactional component there is a web page, and I use that in the most inclusive sense to include data and XML and anything else that you might be able to retrieve. Identify with the URL and retrieve using HTTP protocols. Its organization is very similar to SharePoint. We have top-level websites, and then we have sub-level websites or websites, collections of web pages under that top-level website. And of course, it runs on a web server that implements the HTTP protocol. So this brings us to the trusted digital web. What does it look like? Why or how is it different? And in particular, how is it different from the World Wide Web that we know today? On the top, we move away from the web browser as a client, not away from web technologies, but away from the web browser as a client to a trusted digital assistant, or TDA, typically mobile. And this trusted digital assistant implements a digital identity agent and a digital identity wallet. And in that wallet, there's wallet subledgers that allow you to organize all the different kinds of digital identities that you have, whether that be personal digital identities, identities for the organizations you belong to, the websites that you're a member of, but also the purchase orders, the invoices, the waybills, the delivery confirmations that you have received as part of the business processes you're involved in. The trusted digital assistant also has the ability to enact business processes, again, defined in a standards-based way. When we talk about this world of agents and wallets and digital identities and being able to interact with digital identities through business processes, there's a central concept here of the decentralized identifier. This is the core concept within the whole idea of distributed digital identity. And then the ability to interact with those DIDs through what are known as DID resolver protocols. At the transactional level, what are the entities that we're dealing with? Actors and things, and that's a very broad classification. That includes business documents, people acting in different roles, organizations, different parts of the organization, different contacts within the organization. There's a whole kind of taxonomy of decentralized digital identities, across the planet and the universe. The main organizing concept here starts with the cloud-based wallet, as well as what we call the edge wallet, the wallet that's running that is located at the edge of the network, the one that runs in the trusted digital assistant. But within the cloud wallet and within that edge wallet, a key organizing structure, a key organizing principle is the concept of subledgers. And I encourage you to Google subledgers, which is actually a short form for this longer concept of subsidiary ledgers, from the accounting domain in our first column. And so the platform now is not a single, web farm or hosted solution, SaaS solution like an accounting system, but it's a bunch of communicating, cooperating cloud agents that are engaging in business choreography. Business choreography that involves people, business documents, organizations. It involves hundreds, potentially thousands of instances of different business processes that you might be engaged in at any given time. And then the ability to enact those from a commerce perspective in terms of integrating with purchasing and payments through decentralized identity. Talking about the trusted digital assistant a little bit more and this concept of fully integrated experience, one of the best current examples of a framework, of an agent framework that runs on the Hyperledger Indy platform is something called the StreetCred agent framework. It happens to be a C#.NET Core based environment that makes it very, very easy to create agents. It makes it very, very easy to create this concept of a trusted digital assistant. And so the team at StreetCred have done just a phenomenal job creating this software platform that runs on top of Hyperledger Indy and enables people to create cross-platform clients, cross-platform trusted digital assistants. Another agent framework that I've just become more familiar with is Pico Labs, the MyPicos framework. And there's the URL. And this uses a rules-based language for being able to create agents and allowing agents to communicate through between one another with the Indy agent-to-agent protocol, essentially the same way as the straight cred framework we saw before. But this is kind of a meta application that is coded through rules, and I think has some really interesting options here in terms of how to realize the trusted digital assistant. So that's it for our discussion of the trusted digital web, to give you a concept of what it's all about and the different components that are within that. It runs on top of a blockchain platform called the Hyperonomy business blockchain. So here's a conceptual diagram, and really what I'm emphasizing here is a couple things. One is that it's a hybrid platform. On the left we see Hyperledger Indy, and that's being used to manage those people and organizations, things, business documents, parts, products. Everything will have a digital identity. Everything will have an associated DID. So you can think of that thing on the left as the platform for managing entities. And although we continually reinforce the idea of persons and organizations and business documents, it's really about a platform for managing what are called non-fungible entities. Any entity that is unique and can't be replaced with another of the same kind. And if you think of completed business documents, purchase orders, invoices, way bills, delivery confirmations, they fit that model directly. So that's the green box on the left. It's about managing things and people. On the right is what I sometimes call the general purpose blockchain. And this platform has the capability of implementing the workflow engine. And specifically the standard there is around the BPMN standard for business process modeling and notation. So if you're familiar with swim lane diagrams, BPMN is the standard behind those, so the graphical version of those swim lane diagrams, how you design business process templates, and not only that, how you serialize them into an XML format. And I believe BPMN is an OMG standard. And so on the right is where we run business processes, where we run instances of those business process templates, and where we maintain the history of a business process, the state changes within an instance of a business process, and we do it on the blockchain. And down at the bottom, you'll see a little arrow that connects the green box with the blue box. That's about the integration of the general purpose blockchain platform with the non-fungible entity platform on the left. The ability directly from within the workflow engine, the ability directly from within the virtual machine of the general purpose blockchain to access those entities, through a trusted service. Remember, the things on the left, the NFEs, the non-fungible entities we're dealing with, they are non-fungible. And the Hyperledger Indy platform is going to help us assert that those are immutable, unchangeable, and verifiably what they are the day that they were created. So that makes them ideal candidates to be brought in through the bottom, if you will, of the virtual machine architecture. So this is kind of a conceptual diagram. Um, but there's a little bit of caveat. It's a little bit outdated. It was the most current diagram I had, because two things. One is, as we talked about the agent framework before, there's a possibility of implementing the business process BPMN engine, directly in the agent. So that would say we don't really need the blue thing on the right. The other thing is the blue thing on the right, the general purpose engine, that arrow that connects the Hyperledger Indy platform on the left to the Stratus platform on the right, that can be a direct connection to the Hyperledger Indy blockchain, to the ledger, through something called DID resolver protocols and the DID resolver software technology. So it's a little bit TBD. We got a couple of options, but it was worth going through the long explanation to make sure you understand the concepts. Lastly, on the business document side, I should mention that there's an OASIS specification called UBL, Universal Business Language, that defines 81 standard schemas for the 81 most common business documents that people engage in from a commerce perspective. And then UUBL is my extensions to UBL, so I call it the Universal Blockchain Language, and that has extensions for optimizing the storage of those documents on a blockchain platform. Neonation, this is the third layer at the top. And let's understand a little bit more about what this is about. Again, I kind of gave you a little bit of the motivation that as I looked through, some of the applications that you would want to run, on the Hyperonomy business blockchain, and you want to see them enacted through the trusted digital web. Like a lot of blockchain projects, there's the software technology side, let's say the left hand, and then on the right hand, you have, there's a certain amount of philosophy, or I sometimes use the word religion, that comes with that software platform. And if you've been around the blockchain, communities, the different blockchain communities, you understand what I'm talking about. So the neonation is that philosophical part. It's that independent nation state that implements or administers, it supports the governance aspects of the platform. If we think about the Hyperledger Indy platform, again, that's a software platform. The analogy to neonation would be the sovereign foundation and how it has bootstrapped the sovereign instance of the Indy platform and provided the sovereign governance framework for its management and ongoing administration. So these next few slides are kind of like a bulletin board that where I collect the vision, if you will, for this three-tiered platform. In the bottom left is Serenity Data. Serenity Data is a low-level technology for doing entity serialization in a very efficient way. Originally, this was developed for the Neo blockchain platform. It has been ported over but not deployed to the Stratus platform. And you can find an in-depth article that describes that on my blog on hyperonomy.com. Serenity DApp is a set of applications that are envisioned to run on top of the Hyperonomy business blockchain and leverage Serenity Data for data serialization. You see some of them listed there in the bottom right-hand corner. At the top, we have Neonation, the actual implementation of realization of the the large blue cloud there. And for each of these, domain names have been chosen and purchased. And so neo-nation.com is where the neonation will live. Some of the things related to that are kind of social efforts that are happening. Today there's the .NET C# Developers Center of Excellence on GitHub. There's the .NET Blockchain Toronto meetup group. There's the Blockchain Alberta Center of Excellence, another meetup group. So part of Nation is all the social components of the platform. On the top left, the economic graph really needs to be a presentation of its own, but it was really probably one of the first legs of this platform. In the top left corner, you see a graphic called the economic graph. It's from a short 2-minute and 40-second YouTube video, originally from the CEO of LinkedIn, where he talked about the need to create this interconnected network, or this vision or goal of LinkedIn to create this economic graph that encodes all economic activity on the planet. So 6 billion people, 8 billion people, 70,000 organizations, 60,000 schools, billions of pieces of knowledge and wisdom, millions of jobs, millions of locations, all tied together, and the fellow coined the term the economic graph. So that's another key aspect of what's being created here. At the bottom, in the green rectangle is a number of other kind of side projects. I'll go into those at a later date. So those are the highlights to a certain level of detail. There's lots of other content, lots of other knowledge and information that will come forward in future webcasts, and these slides just highlight a small portion of that. So to wrap up, I recently attended the BC Tech Summit Hyperledger Indy boot camp in Vancouver, and I was fortunate to meet face-to-face a fellow by the name of Sam Curran, and he was involved in a side conversation with a small group of developers, and he talked about the importance for internet protocols to not only be open, but more importantly, open to innovation. And when he was asked kind of what that meant, he talked about innovations that might succeed and innovations that also might fail. And his favorite example was TCP/IP. The fact that TCP/IP packets running on a network or running on the internet are able to, carry any type of data, starting out with just, text messages, email messages, later on web pages, and more recently, streaming audio and streaming video. He asked, who could have imagined that when they were writing that TCP/IP specification? And so his comment is that it's vitally important for internet protocols to not only be open, but open to innovation. Innovations that might succeed and innovations that might fail. No one can foretell the specifications we're creating today and how they'll be used in the future. So this article on my blog, you can find it on hyperonomy.com, helps reinforce that as we're thinking through the early stages and the early days, of digital identifiers, distributed digital identities, the protocols for operating with those, that we have to keep this particular, what I call the open to innovation principle, very much in the forefront of our mindset, that internet protocols and standards not only need to be open, but they need to be, more importantly, open to innovation. If you have any questions, you can email me. There's my email address, mwherman at parallelspace.net. I'm also active on the Hyperledger Indie Rocket Chat channels, the Sovereign Foundation Rocket Chat channels, and many of the W3C working groups, sovereign working groups that are related to digital identity. And I'd like to thank you for spending the last 35 minutes with me, and look forward to engaging further and providing you with more updates.